Awesome.
Okay. So today, to open our special Gregário Tech, we will be doing it in English because we have a super special guest, simply the godfather, the master, one of the persons who developed training the way we do today, developed the industry, and is shaping the future of the bike. It is Mr. Hunter Allen, the writer and publisher of the training Bible of power meters. So Hunter, it's a huge pleasure having you with us on board Gregário Tech this week.
No, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here as well. I'm so excited to bring more knowledge and to share as much as I can with all the listeners of your podcast. And I know it's being incredibly successful right now. So congratulations on your success too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think everybody's super excited. I have a huge list of questions we could sit around, but we will try to keep it together and be strict to the point. I think we can start. Rafael also has a huge, many questions, but giving a quick introduction, you are one of the early developers of power meters. It started back nearly 20 years ago, I guess we're speaking now, from the power taps to the SRMs, which were the early adopters. And now the market has evolved a lot. So if 10, 15 years ago, we had very few options to train with power, now it has grown that we have pretty much every brand has their own parameters, from components suppliers to specific power meter companies, like we mentioned, power tap, SRM, stages, power to max. So the list is huge. I would like to know from your side, how has it been to see this evolution of the product that you have been working around for so long?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great question because I first started coaching a rider in 1998 with a power meter, a power tap. And I realized really soon that I didn't understand what 200 watts meant, what 1,000 watts meant, what any of these numbers meant. And so I bought a power tap and started training with it again. I had retired from pro cycling in 1995 and then started to train again because I needed to really have a personal relationship with the data, and did hill repeats and did races and did everything that I used to do. And so that helped me to understand how to begin training with a power meter. And early on in 2000, 1999, 2000, all the way through 2005, 2006, the people who were using power meters were what we call master riders here in the United States. So riders over the age of 40. And very competitive amateurs. They love racing. That's their hobby. But those were the riders, one, who could afford and to buy a power meter. And then two, they were always trying to optimize their training so that they could become even better with the least amount of time possible in training. So it was very interesting, you know, in the previous podcast with Gregário, I talked a lot about car racing. I'm a huge car racing fan, especially Formula One. And, you know, when we think about car racing, we think about technology. Technology comes down from the top a lot of times. You know, we can even look at, you know, the technology that's come from the NASA program going to the moon and things like this has come down. And in Formula One, that's the same way. The technology is developed here and it comes down. But the opposite happened with power meters in cycling, where the beginner cyclists, you know, the master cyclists, they started with power meters first, and then the technology went up to the pros, because no professional rider really, I mean, there were some early adopters, but there weren't many professionals using power meters for a long, long time. And that was very interesting, that evolution. And around 2006, 2007, 2008, maybe 2009, that switched. And now all of a sudden, pro riders started using power meters. And then every time I'd open up a magazine or look on a website, you could see a power meter on their bike, right? And they were using them. They were asking me questions. They were looking at the data. They're trying to figure it out. And they're hiring coaches. And what do I do with this information? And so at that time, then it began trickle back down again. And so then all of a sudden, all the pros had power meters, and then all of the amateurs, the beginner racers, were like, wow, pros have them. We should get one too. And so it's been a really interesting evolution from that perspective.
It goes around. I talk a lot when speaking in Portuguese that people don't believe it, but actually pro bike racers in general are pretty old school, damn hard-headed people. Eh? They are super skeptical into trying new technologies and new things, right? I think you can definitely, your story totally shows that.
Yeah. It's changed for sure in the last 20 years. It's gotten better for sure. Now and I think that's also has to do with the age of pro riders, right? Now we have riders who are pros who are 20, 25 years old, and they grew up with smartphones, right? They've grown up with all the technology. And so they're more likely to use it now and to be open to this kind of new ideas and new things to approach. And so I think it's really been a generational shift. There's still some of the old school thoughts for sure. And this is how we did it, and this is the way we always do it, etc. It's cycling is a funny sport sometimes.
Well, it's I'm many times amazed about how stubborn I would define a professional cyclist can be, and you see that constantly with the evolution of the industry. But you touched a very curious point that for me personally, I was recently reading an interview with Chris Froome where he was talking exactly about this evolution of sport and this phenomenon, we could say, of younger riders already arriving at the top level and riding at such a high level. And there seems to be a general consensus that the average level of the professional peloton has gone up. Let's say maybe the really, really good ones are just as good as the past ones. So from the Pantanis, from the Merckx eras, but maybe the average level has gone up a lot in the World Tour. And a lot of that is to be thanked to the power meter, because training science has evolved in a way that power meters and power numbers and watts per kilo and FTPs and all those things are just common sense now. And I'm sure you had a great part into this evolution, and you have written a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, it is. I think you're right, because what power meters have brought to cycling and to triathlon also is it's almost it's almost a guarantee. And so before we had a power meter, we didn't really know for certain, were we training the right energy system? Are we training our lactate system? Are we training our endurance? Are we improving our anaerobic ability? And, you know, we thought maybe we were, right? Because we were looking at heart rate, we were looking at speed, we were trying to listen to our body, listen to the feelings of our body. But it wasn't, you know, heart rate is deceiving, right? There are lots of things that impact heart rate. Your feeling is, you know, completely can be totally the opposite of what's the reality is. So a power meter brings that truth. And I like to, I mean, I don't want to say it's a guarantee, but it's almost a guarantee, right? When you know what your FTP is, and you know your training zones, and if I spend this much time, you know, 20 minutes at my FTP, then I'm going to improve my FTP. And so, or if I spend 3 hours riding in the tempo zone from 76 to 90% of my FTP, I'm going to improve my endurance capacity and my stamina. So that's something that, you know, that I missed when I was a pro. One of the reasons I became a coach and started Peaks Coaching Group was I wanted to coach, right? I spent so much time, you know, trying this and trying that and failing and wasting my time that, you know, being a coach and having somebody to help you say, this is what you need to do, this is your path to get to the best level the fastest, was a really important thing for me. And power meters, like you said, and like Chris Froome said, has really made a shortcut, so that we can get to that place without making so many mistakes and taking more years.
Well, I might be wrong, but if I'm not wrong, if I remember well, your friend Greg LeMond was the very first to use an SRM power meter, like 35 years ago, back in time. And we still see these days SRM as the benchmark of the market. What do you think about the old technology of the strain gauges and the accelerometers that you see these days on the stuff or the AliExpress? Could you tell us something? Are you allowed to tell what you think and what do you recommend to your BFF?
Sure. Well, no, you're exactly right. I mean, Greg LeMond had a power meter back in 1994, 1993. It was a huge SRM. I think that the head unit was big, massive, weighed a kilo. Yeah, I mean, SRM is still doing great work, right? They're a great company. They've been around for the entire time. They make great work. I think that that's a tough question because there is no perfect power meter, and you have to ask yourself the question. Number one, where do you want to measure power? And number two, is there a power meter that works on your bike? So, for example, maybe you have you ride the speed play pedals. Speed play pedals here in the United States are very popular. And I ride them, I love them. But, you know, I don't want to change to a different pair of pedals, right? I don't want to ride the Look platform because my knees aren't as happy. And so for me, the pedals aren't a great option. So then I have to say, okay, where can I measure power? Will my bike, is there a power meter that fits on this bike frame in the Spider? You know, can I use a SRM? Can I use a Cork? Can I use a Power to Max? Which one can I use? And so then at that point, you have to just say, oh, wow, this one will fit on my bike. I like it. You know, they do a great job. It's, it works. I think all of them are very good right now. The Quark, the Power to Max, the SRM, they're excellent. Rotor, all those are very good. So I think that, the ones that are the most problematic are the ones that are where they have a little pod on the crank arm, the stages, and maybe there's a couple of other ones that are like that. Those tend to have more issues because of the fact that they're putting something onto a part. They're using epoxy, they're using glue with strain gauges in there. And so I think there's a chance for more error there. So it really depends on where you want to measure power. I've been mountain biking a lot this year. I've had a lot of fun. I just came back from Peru. I was down in Peru for 3 weeks racing in a 5-day mountain bike stage race at Machu Picchu. And it was amazing. But mountain biking is really hard to find the power meter you want. Is there a power meter that even works for your bike? And the pedal power meters, for mountain biking, I think they need a little more time. I'm not convinced that they're perfect yet and right. So there's no great answer. Sorry, Rob.
But for instance,
usually the answer for everything training and bike related is it depends.
It depends. Yes.
It answers. It's right on 99.9% of time. It depends.
This is true.
But how important is the accuracy of the power meter for your own compare and to compare with the numbers to other people? Right. What do you think?
It is important, right? I think it's very important. How accurate is important. I think that 2% or less is very good. I would not be happy with anything that is more than 2%. I know that there is one company called InfoCrank. They claim less than 1%. So they are very, very accurate. Do you need a power meter that accurate? Oh, I mean, 1% is, my FTP is 300 watts, so 1% is 3 watts. I'm probably not going to make a decision whether to change my training zones based on 3 watts, one way or the other. 6 watts, okay, that's 2%. Well, now we're starting to see, well, that's, there could be a difference here between 6 watts. So I think that's important. So as long as you have 2% or less, then you've got a very good power meter. All of a sudden you get to 5%. I mean, that's 300 watts. At 300 watts, that's 15 watts. That's massive, right? I mean, some people could train an entire year and not improve their FTP by 15 watts. So that could be a big problem.
Yeah, but for instance, if you are a sprinter and you are talking about 2% over 1,000, it's a lot for a sprinter, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it could be a big difference for a sprinter.
But
if you get the data, yeah, you can go. Sorry.
That's a pretty good point that Rafael.
All the measure in time, right? So
not only related to, well, it's important that your power meter is consistent within itself. But one thing that I've noticed from changing teams and changing suppliers from year to year is that although they claim accuracy of 2% or whatever, it still changes a lot from brand to brand.
Oh yeah,
so for example, maybe 350 watts at an SRM, it's not 350 watts at a Garmin.
Right.
Although those 350 watts are always 350 for the SRM. And yeah, okay, for seeing the training evolution, that's important, that the power meter measures within itself consistently.
It's got to be consistent.
Yeah, comparing numbers, I still see a big gap between companies.
Yeah, and the one thing that you also need to remember too is, you need a power meter that measures both sides. Okay, so I know that it's a little less expensive to buy a power meter that just measures one side, like the left arm or the right pedal. But this really can be very different between your legs. So, and not only just between your legs, but it's also very different across your training zones. So for example, I had an athlete that I coached one time where when he was riding at endurance pace, his left leg would do 60% of the work riding at endurance pace. And his right leg was just resting. It was lazy. But then when he got close to his FTP, his right leg would now start doing 60% of the work. It was as if the right leg was resting at endurance pace so that when he got to go, when he needed to go really hard, his right leg was rested and he could go really hard with that leg. But then when he sprinted, his left leg did 80% of the work in the sprint. So if you're only using a one-sided power meter, you're really not looking at good data. So it's very important to make sure you measure both sides. And to be clear, there's a difference between independent power measuring, when you measure the right side and you measure also the left side. You can say, okay, well, this is 150 watts and this is 150 watts, and they're separate. Like, so the pedals do this, the Shimano power meter does this, the rotor can do this, the 4 eyes can do this, stages can do this. So lots of power meters can do that. Versus measuring the total power, like SRM measures total power, and the Spider, power to max, Cork, they all measure the total power. So you're getting both left and right. I just want to make sure that nobody gets confused.
Yeah, I might be wrong, but I've tested many power meters in the past years, and I can see that discrepancy on the usually occur on the high numbers, not on the average ones. Do you notice that, or is just craziness from my mind?
No, I mean, you're right. I think that's something that you know, that all of these are different, and you have to be very careful with what you're measuring. And the left and right side is you know, normally everybody has a 5% difference between the left leg and the right leg. That's normal. Okay, so 5% is normal. So if you're using a power meter that, let's say, for example, you're using the Garmin rally pedals, and you're seeing a 10% difference, the left leg is 10% stronger than the right leg, then you probably need to do something about that. Okay, so let's work with the right leg to improve that, so that's a little more, adding a little more power into the equation. But it's a 5% change. That's okay. I'm not too worried about that.
And for instance, if you get data from 10 years in the past and get the same data today, if you look at, can you still trust the numbers from 10 years in the past?
Well,
or do you think that the technology might be so better these days than it used to be in the past?
Well, I think so that is a little bit about the power meter you're using. So if you have an SRM that is 10 years old and you've been using the same SRM for 10 years, the numbers are probably pretty good. Now, all of the power meters that use strain gauges, they use epoxy glue to glue the strain gauges. And so the glue continues to get harder and harder and harder every year. And so that changes the calibration of the power meter. And so, for example, you know, you just need to, SRM, you need to recalibrate it. It's just like the bathroom scale in your bathroom. When you get on the scale and you stand on the scale, as that gets older and older, that calibration changes. So you have to kind of recalibrate that scale sometimes. But if you're changing power meters, wow, I go from a power tap that measures in the rear hub. Well, that's always going to be 7 to 10 watts lower than what's measured in the spider. And so I go from a power tap to a quark, and then I go from a quark to pedals, then there's probably going to be some differences between those numbers.
And I also have a really tech question to you that I always wanted to ask. And you are probably the only one that might be might have the right answer. How important is the head unit on the power meter? Because I remember 10 years in the past, all the Peloton were using the SRM head unit, and there are many explanations about that. And how do you see the auto zero stuff and the importance of having a good head unit 2021?
Yeah, that's really important. We battled. I battled this for many years, because when I co-founded WKO software, we had to download all of the head units. We had to learn how to download all the head units, and we had to look at the data inside the head units. And there are many problems in the head units, looking at the data. Power tap, I remember they used to record, their recording rate was 1.26 seconds. So they recorded every 1.26 seconds. And this created a major problem with the data, and the way that the data that came out, because of this weird time that they recorded at. When the Garmin head unit first came out, the Garmin was recording at 1 second, but it would take 4 seconds of data. So the first second, second second, third second, fourth second, and it would record that number, and that would be it. So it would always take every 4 seconds, it was taking the number. The SRM has always been very good. Number one, because they measure at 200 times a second. So the SRM measures 200 at 200 hertz, and then they average that 200 hertz into a second. And so that's always a good one to look at. The one that I liked best, actually, was they're out of business now, is the Pioneer, because the Pioneer had a magnet on the crank on the bottom bracket. It had 12 magnets. And so it measured 12 different locations on the pedal stroke around the circle. And then it averaged those 12 different times. So it didn't measure in time, 1 second. It measured on the actual place where you were pedaling. And that's a really good way to do it. So the head units are really important. Right now, I know the Stages head unit,
the
dash, it does some manipulation of the data inside the head unit.
On the power curve, right?
Yeah, so it does that inside the head unit. So you're not really seeing the absolute truth coming from the dash, because they're taking the data, they're doing some calculations on it, and then you're downloading the calculated data. The SRM doesn't do any real calculations inside. The Garmin head unit doesn't do any that I know of, besides they're correcting some elevation data. The power data is pretty good that comes from that. Many people who have the Garmin, they leave it on smart recording, but this is really bad. So if you have a Garmin, you have to have it on 1 second sampling, 1 second recording. Smart recording works really well for GPS. Let's say you're riding from this point to this point, and this is 1 kilometer. It'll take a sample here at the beginning, and then it'll take a sample here in the end and record these 2 points. Then you go around a turn, and it will record the entire turn when you go around the turn. So you get lots of points around the turn, but it doesn't record any of the data in the straight section. So you could miss a lot of data here. So you need to record it always on 1 second sampling. The auto zero is very important. I make sure that before every ride, I zero my power meter. I mean, every single ride. It's just, you don't know what's going to what happens, you know, if there's a temperature change, if your bike fell over, if you put your bike on the bike rack of your car, or you know, something happens to it, or you change the battery inside the power meter. You have to zero it every single ride, and that way you know you're getting good data.
Yeah. Out of here, it's a curious question. You have someone new coming to train with you. He doesn't have any power meters at all, nor head unit. And he says, I need to buy. Which one do I buy?
Well, again, that depends on your bike, right? It depends on where you want to measure it, right? So it really depends on that. And I think that's the most important thing to look at. SRM is great. I mean, they have a great power meter. They have a great head unit. I also like the Garmin head unit. You know, I use the Garmin 1030 myself. I've been using it for many years. I like to be able to change the screens easily. That works great. I have clients who use the Wahoo unit. That one also, I think, works well. You know, the Cork power meter is great. The Power to Max one is great. I mean, all of these are really good ones to use. I like the Favero pedals, the pedals from Italy. The Favero pedals work very well also. They're easy to charge. I haven't had any problems with any of those as well. So there are so many out there. It's just kind of where you want to use it.
Do you think that Favero pedals are the best in the market or not?
For pedals?
Yes, for pedals.
I think right now they are. Yeah, I think they are right now. I like the Power Tap pedals even better when the Power Tap had their pedals, because I know that they did a very good job with their measuring and the accuracy, the way that they built the pedals. Unfortunately, SRAM bought them and then has stopped making the pedals now. So I think that the Favero has got a very good technology. It's very stable. It works really well, and I think that's fine. Now, we'll see more. We need to learn more about the new Garmin Rally pedals. And so we'll have to see more about that. We need a little more time to learn about those. The SRM pedals, we need to see a little bit more data from that as well. So we'll see, but right now I like the Favero pedals.
And if you get these days, like you can go. Sorry.
Cool. Well, it's certain that with options of power meters, techniques, and everything, we are spoiled, and that's why it has evolved so much that training with power is so widespread right now. And we have. But looking a little bit at going forward, for example, we know that physiology and training science is constantly evolving, and we are constantly looking at new. We are constantly learning, not looking for, I would say, new things. And I think, from what I see on my perspective, I would like to see your point on the new glucose measurement gadgets. So the Super Sapiens think that people with diabetes For people who don't know what a glucose measure is, basically it is a sticker or a patch which
Yep.
you glue into your skin, and
Yep.
it measures your blood glucose while you are exercising
Right.
or doing anything else. It's very common in the industry for people with diabetes, and now it's getting more widespread into training and how to use that. What is your take on this evolution and training via glucose
Yeah.
patches?
I mean, I think this is where the future is moving. I think that you know, having a glucose monitor is really good, right? I mean, it's really, really good. You can see the data right on your head unit. You can see when your numbers, your glucose levels are starting to drop. You can start to eat, you know, food before they get too low. Before your brain says, I need food. You can also learn, you know, what foods are good for you. You know, I have a client who uses one, and he can't, every time he eats pasta, for him, his glucose goes straight up through the ceiling. And so he just, that's his body. His body doesn't do good with eating pasta. So for him, he eats different types of carbohydrates that keep his blood sugars and glucose levels more stable. So I think that's a great one. I think we'll also start to see respiration measurements. So we start to understand, you know, the breathing of the lungs and what we're seeing is happening from respiration more and more. I think that that's going to be very interesting. You probably have seen or heard about the Aura ring or the Whoop strap. Those are great tools. I use the Whoop strap with many of my athletes. I've used it for many years as well. I have other athletes with the Aura ring. It's a great tool to help understand recovery, the things that hurt your recovery. You know, for me, it's alcohol, right? If I have one glass of red wine, I sleep terrible. and so it's like, you know, if I have a beer, I don't sleep great. So for me, alcohol, I have to be very, very careful with drinking alcohol because it really impacts my sleep and it hurts my recovery. So there's lots of these things that we're going to see even more that monitor the body, the physiology. From a cycling perspective, it's hard to say, is there another device like a power meter that will come out? I think that we'll see probably more aerodynamic integration. This kind of thing is probably will happen. But there isn't much else to measure on a bicycle that we can really use that data to make ourselves a faster cyclist. We could certainly put strain gauges on the frame. We could do things with braking, those kind of things. But will that make us really a faster cyclist? Probably not.
That's perhaps more on the bike industry side to develop better braking technology, better frames, better wheels that ride faster. But in what behalf, what touches the human physiology, indeed, it's what goes on the bike. But it's true, you mentioned the Oura ring, the Whoop straps, and these are pretty easily accessible. You can have through your Garmin, I guess. They do something like that, HRV. But it's curious. I'm always passionate about looking a little bit. Sometimes I say I need to be a little bit less of a data freak and focus more on the essence, because in the end, what makes you a better rider is just riding your bike and being active to be a better, more active human being. But all those tools, I would say, they help us a lot to let's say, use our engine in a better way. and learn how to take the most out of our system.
Yeah.
Well, Hunter, I think it has been a huge pleasure. I'm sure, yeah, me and Rafa, you want to do one last question before we close?
Yes,
we
yes.
are already over 45 minutes.
Sure, please ask. Please ask.
Nicholas is an professional athlete, and I'm just an old amateur. So I have a question about the data. Okay. Should everybody include the zeros on the recordings or not?
Good question.
Good one.
So for power, include the zeros. For cadence, do not include the zeros. Okay, so for cadence, think of if I'm doing a 5-minute interval and I want Nicholas to hold 90 RPM. I say, okay, Nicholas, you have to hold 90 RPM for 5 minutes. So for 3 minutes, he's holding exactly 90 RPM. But then a dog comes out and he has to stop pedaling for 30 seconds. And then the last minute and a half, he rides at 90 RPM. So if we include the zeros, then his average was probably 87 RPM. But we know that Nicholas, when he was pedaling at 90 for the whole time. So therefore, it's better for cadence to not include zeros. But power, we want to include zeros because number one, we want to see the time you are not pedaling, because time not pedaling is also important. So how much time did you spend with zero power? And then two, we want to see the difference between our average power and what is our normalized power when we're riding on a rolly course. And so we need to understand the difference between these two, because this helps us to make a decision on pacing in many times.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
It's
amazing.
It has been, Hunter, we could stay here another couple of hours and keep on talking, and there are many things that will come on. We should perhaps arrange a Gregário meets with you, or some sort of training camp would be a huge opportunity. I know you have already been to Brazil a few times. I hope we can repeat. It would be great. And again, it has been a huge pleasure for myself personally. I would like to thank you personally for all the good work you have done to our sport and to the bike roll. And also for being and sharing your time and your knowledge here with us in Gregário. Yeah, thank you. And the doors are always open for you whenever you would like to come back.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
A day to remember in my life.
You are too nice. You guys are too nice. Thank you so much.
Super. Thank you once again.
Okay. Thank you. Have a nice day.
You too.